Mrs. Whitmore, before I process this request, I need to ask why your son has been withdrawing money from your retirement account for the past 3 years. The young woman at the bank spoke gently, almost carefully, like someone afraid of breaking bad news to an old woman sitting alone beneath fluorescent lights. I stared at her across the desk, my gloved hands frozen around my purse strap. Outside the large front windows of the Burlington Savings Bank, snow drifted softly onto Main Street. Vermont winters had always felt peaceful to me. That morning, for the first time in 68 years, the falling snow looked cold enough to bury a person alive. My son, I repeated quietly. There must be some mistake. The banker's expression shifted slightly. Not pity exactly. Something worse. Concern mixed with hesitation. She turned the computer monitor toward me and pointed to a list of transactions. Transfer after transfer after transfer. Thousands of dollars. Some months 5,000. Some months more. The names beside the withdrawals meant nothing to me at first. Whitmore Holdings, LLC. Green Valley Property Group. A luxury dealership in Boston. I blinked slowly, trying to steady myself. My late husband Charles had spent 37 years building that retirement account. He used to joke that every overtime shift at the hardware plant added another brick to our future. We weren't rich people. We were careful people. That account was supposed to help me live quietly after he passed. Pay for heating oil during harsh winters. Cover prescriptions. Maybe let me visit Maine one last time before my knees gave out completely. I swallowed hard. I don't understand, I whispered. I never approved any of this. The banker clicked another page open. According to the records, your son Daniel Whitmore has authorized access. There are digital signatures attached to every transfer. Daniel, my only child. The boy who used to leave handwritten notes in my lunchbox when I worked double shifts at the diner. The boy who cried for an hour when he accidentally broke my favorite coffee mug in 5th grade because he thought I'd be heartbroken. I suddenly realized I couldn't remember. The last time he had called me first. My chest tightened. Could I see the signatures? I asked. The woman nodded. I leaned closer toward the screen, adjusting my glasses. At first glance, the signatures looked similar enough to mine. Eleanor Whitmore. But the curves were wrong. The spacing too sharp. Like someone had practiced copying my name without ever learning how I actually wrote it. A strange ringing filled my ears. Mrs. Whitmore, the banker asked softly. Would you like some water? I shook my head slowly. No water could wash away what I was beginning to understand. Suddenly, every ignored phone call felt different. Every birthday card that arrived late. Every visit Daniel and his wife Vanessa canceled because they were supposedly too busy. Last Thanksgiving, I had eaten frozen turkey dinner alone, while their Facebook photos showed them drinking wine at a ski resort in Colorado. Vanessa had commented beneath one picture, "Family time is priceless." I remember staring at those words while microwaving instant mashed potatoes in my quiet kitchen. Even then, I still defended them. Young couples are busy, Eleanor, I told myself. Don't be difficult. Don't become one of those bitter old women people whisper about. The banker folded her hands carefully. Mrs. Whitmore, there's one more thing. My stomach dropped before she even spoke again. Your son called this morning asking why the account had been temporarily frozen. I stared at her. Frozen? She nodded. There was an automated security review after your request to close the account online late last night. I felt the blood drain from my face. I never made any online request. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the heater near the window. Then, for the first time in years, something inside me stopped making excuses for my family. I drove home from the bank with both hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached beneath my wool gloves. Snow clung to the edges of the windshield while the old Buick rattled softly every time I stopped at a red light. Burlington looked beautiful that afternoon in the way only small Vermont towns can during winter. Church steeples dusted white. Smoke curling from chimneys. Couples carrying grocery bags through slushy sidewalks. Everything looked warm from the outside. That was the strange thing about betrayal. The world did not change when your heart did. The coffee shop near Lake Champlain still had its holiday wreath hanging in the window. The hardware store still displayed snow shovels outside for $39 each. Life kept moving while something inside you quietly collapsed. When I pulled into my driveway, the snowbanks along the edges were nearly knee-high. I shut off the engine and sat there for a long moment staring at my little white house. Charles and I bought it in 1984 after saving for nearly 10 years. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, A crooked front porch he always promised to fix, but never did. After he died 4 years ago from congestive heart failure, the silence inside that house became something alive. Not loud silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settled into corners and waited for you when the television turned off at night. I carried my grocery bag and purse inside carefully, wiping my boots on the old plaid rug near the door. The heater hummed softly in the living room. I kept the thermostat at 63 degrees during the day to save money. Oil prices had climbed again that winter, and I had already started cutting little corners to stretch what I thought was left of my savings. Half portions of medication. Generic canned soup instead of fresh ingredients. One less load of laundry every week. All that time, thousands of dollars had apparently been disappearing behind my back. I hung my coat slowly and glanced toward the framed photographs lining the hallway wall. Daniel at 8 years old holding a baseball glove bigger than his chest. Daniel graduating from the University of Vermont with tears in his eyes, while Charles clapped harder than anyone in the crowd. Daniel on his wedding day beside Vanessa, both of them smiling beneath strings of white lights at the country club reception. I stared at that photo the longest. Vanessa had looked beautiful that day in a soft ivory dress with pearl earrings. She hugged me tightly before the ceremony and whispered, "Thank you for raising such a wonderful man." Back then I believed she meant it. I walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. A carton of eggs. Half a gallon of milk. Leftover chicken casserole from 3 nights ago. I suddenly remembered Daniel laughing 6 months earlier when I told him I had switched to powdered creamer because it was cheaper. "Mom, you do not have to live like a college student," he had said casually over the phone. "You should enjoy retirement." I closed the refrigerator door harder than I meant to. Enjoy retirement. The words echoed strangely now. My phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, making me jump. Daniel's name appeared across the screen. For a moment, I simply stared at it. He had not called me in nearly 3 weeks. The last conversation lasted less than 4 minutes because Vanessa needed help choosing furniture for their new lake house outside Boston. I let the phone ring until voicemail picked up. A second later, another call came, this time from Vanessa. I watched her name flash across the screen while a cold feeling settled deeper into my stomach. Not concern, not panic, clarity. I did not answer her either. Instead, I walked to the window above the sink and looked out toward the backyard where Charles used to hang bird feeders every December. The maple tree stood bare against the gray sky. Snow drifted slowly across the fence line. My phone buzzed again, then again, for missed calls within 10 minutes. I finally turned the sound off completely and set the phone face down beside the sugar bowl. The quiet that followed felt different from the loneliness I had carried these past few years. Loneliness hurts. But this was something sharper. Like waking up after years inside a fog and realizing the people you defended the most had been counting on your silence all along. I walked back into the living room and lowered myself carefully into Charles's old recliner. The springs creaked beneath me. Across the room sat the oak cabinet where we kept every important document in labeled folders. Insurance papers, tax returns, bank records. Charles always believed in keeping things organized because, as he used to say, confusion is where people lose money. I stared at that cabinet for a very long time before finally whispering the words aloud into the empty room. What else have they taken from me? That night, I barely slept. The house groaned softly under the weight of the wind while snow tapped against the bedroom windows in uneven little bursts. Around 2 in the morning, I finally gave up pretending rest would come and walked downstairs wrapped in Charles's old gray cardigan. The kitchen light cast a pale yellow glow across the linoleum floor as I sat at the table with a cup of chamomile tea growing cold between my hands. My phone remained silent now. No more calls from Daniel. No messages from Vanessa. That silence told me something too. Panic only lasts so long when people think they still have control of a situation. I stared at the oak cabinet in the corner of the dining room for several minutes before finally standing and opening the bottom drawer where Charles kept our financial records. The folders were exactly how he left them. Neat labels written in thick black marker. Retirement, insurance, utilities, property taxes. Charles believed paperwork should always tell the truth, even when people did not. I carried several folders back to the kitchen table and began sorting through years of statements beneath the soft ticking of the wall clock. At first, nothing looked unusual. Monthly deposits, routine bills, modest withdrawals. Then I noticed the changes beginning shortly after Charles died. Small amounts at first. $800, $1,200. Transfers labeled as authorized family support. I frowned. Daniel had never once mentioned needing help financially. If anything, he and Vanessa seemed to spend money the way younger people breathed air. Luxury vacations, renovations, expensive dinners posted online beside captions about gratitude and success. I remembered the last Christmas party they hosted in Boston. Vanessa had proudly shown guests her imported Italian marble countertops, while I quietly calculated whether I could afford to replace the worn tires on my Buick before the next snowstorm. My stomach tightened as I flipped through more pages. The withdrawals grew larger. Every year, $10,000 during one 6-month stretch alone. Some transfers were routed through companies I had never heard of. Others went directly into accounts connected to Daniel. I rubbed my forehead slowly. A memory surfaced then, sudden and sharp. About a year ago, Daniel had insisted on helping me simplify my banking after I complained about forgetting passwords online. We sat together right here at this kitchen table while he clicked through account settings on my laptop. Vanessa stood behind him drinking coffee from one of my mugs, occasionally suggesting things in that smooth, cheerful voice of hers. "This will make everything easier for you, Eleanor," she had said. Easier. I almost laughed aloud hearing the word echo inside my head now. Back then I felt grateful they were taking an interest in my life. Looking back, I could not remember either of them asking how I was actually doing. They only asked questions about paperwork, passwords, investments, insurance policies, beneficiaries. I closed my eyes briefly. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from realizing the moments you once treasured were never what you thought they were. Around 4 a.m, I found something that made my hands start trembling again. A printed authorization form dated 18 months earlier. My signature appeared at the bottom, approving expanded account access for Daniel Whitmore. But I knew immediately I had never signed it. Not because the signature looked wrong this time. Because the date itself stood out clearly in my mind. That was the week I had been hospitalized with pneumonia in Burlington Medical Center. I had not touched paperwork for days. I remember lying in a narrow hospital bed listening to nurses walk the hallway while Daniel visited only once for less than 20 minutes because Vanessa had an important dinner reservation. I stared at the forged paper for a long time before carefully placing it aside. The heater clicked on again, filling the kitchen with dry warmth. Outside the windows, dawn had begun turning the snow pale blue. I suddenly understood why Daniel sounded nervous whenever I mentioned visiting Boston unexpectedly. Why? Vanessa always preferred talking over speakerphone instead of letting me speak privately with my son. Why every conversation somehow drifted back toward money disguised as concern. You should think about downsizing, Eleanor. Managing a house alone at your age must be stressful. You need people to help make financial decisions. I used to hear those comments and think they worried about me growing older. Now I heard something else entirely. They had already started deciding what parts of my life belonged to them. I slowly gathered every suspicious document into a separate pile and stacked them carefully beside my teacup. Then I reached for the phone book Charles refused to throw away even after everyone started using smartphones. My fingers stopped beside one familiar name. Martha Green, retired accountant, widow, church volunteer, one of the few people Charles trusted completely. I had not spoken to Martha in nearly 8 months. But as the first weak morning light crept across my kitchen table, I realized I no longer needed comfort from old friends. I needed the truth. By 8:30 that morning, I was standing outside Martha Green's little blue Cape Cod house on the edge of South Burlington, with a folder pressed tightly against my chest and exhaustion sitting heavy behind my eyes. Thin smoke drifted from her chimney into the pale winter sky, and for one strange second, I almost turned around and drove home. Not because I doubted what I had found, but because saying it aloud to another person would make it real in a way I still was not ready to face. Martha opened the door before I even knocked twice. She wore thick wool socks, dark green sweatpants, and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. Her silver hair looked hastily pinned back, and the smell of cinnamon oatmeal drifted from somewhere inside the house. "Eleanor," she said softly, immediately studying my face with concern. "Honey, what happened?" I tried to answer calmly, but my voice came out thinner than I intended. "I think my son has been stealing from me." Martha did not gasp. She did not ask dramatic questions. She simply stepped aside and said, "Come inside before you freeze." That was one thing I always appreciated about Martha. Some people react to pain like spectators at a parade. Martha treated pain like weather. Quietly. Practically. We sat at her kitchen table while snow fell steadily outside her windows. I spread the documents out between us one by one. The forged signatures. The transfer records. The suspicious authorizations. Martha adjusted her glasses and began reading silently, her expression tightening more with every page. The only sound in the room was the ticking of a small rooster-shaped clock above the stove. Finally, she placed one paper down very carefully and looked at me. "How long have you suspected something?" "Since yesterday afternoon," I admitted. "But if I am honest, maybe much longer than that." Martha nodded slowly, like someone fitting puzzle pieces together in her mind. "Older people always know when something feels wrong," she said quietly. "We just spend too much time convincing ourselves we are imagining it." I stared into my untouched coffee. That sentence settled heavily inside me because it was true. The signs had been there for years. I remembered Vanessa insisting I should add Daniel to my accounts for safety. I remembered how quickly she volunteered to organize Charles's paperwork after the funeral while I was still struggling to breathe through grief. I remembered Daniel becoming strangely impatient anytime I asked questions about finances. "Mom, you worry too much. Mom, it is complicated. Mom, trust me. Trust me." Those two words suddenly felt filthy in my memory. Martha continued reviewing the documents carefully. Her fingers paused over one transfer statement before she frowned. "This LLC here," she said, tapping the page lightly. "Green Valley Property Group. That sounds familiar." She stood up and disappeared briefly into another room before returning with an old laptop balanced carefully in her arms. After several minutes of searching public records online, her mouth tightened. "Well," she murmured quietly. "There it is." She turned the screen toward me. My stomach dropped instantly. Registered owner, Vanessa Whitmore. I stared at the screen while a cold numbness spread slowly through my chest. Not Daniel. Vanessa. Somehow that hurt even more, because it confirmed what I had quietly feared for years, but never allowed myself to believe completely. My son might have been weak, selfish, careless even, but Vanessa was deliberate, calculating, patient. Martha folded her hands together. "Eleanor, I need you to think carefully before you confront them." I gave a hollow little laugh. "Confront them? Martha, I do not even recognize my own life right now." She reached across the table and touched my wrist gently. "That is exactly why you cannot move emotionally. People like this count on confusion. They count on guilt. They count on you wanting to protect the family image more than yourself." Her words settled into the quiet kitchen while snow continued falling outside in thick white waves. For years I had protected that image. Even when Daniel forgot birthdays. Even when Vanessa excluded me from holidays with polite excuses wrapped in fake concern. I protected them to neighbors, to church friends, to myself. Because admitting your own child sees you as useful instead of loved feels unbearable. Martha closed the laptop softly. "Do they know you discovered this?" "No," I answered. "Not yet." She nodded once. "Good. Then right now, Eleanor, your silence is your advantage." I looked down at the stack of papers spread across the kitchen table. My retirement savings. Charles's lifetime of work. My trust. My grief. Somehow all of it had slowly become raw material for someone else's comfortable life. And for the first time since walking into that bank the day before, I stopped feeling shocked. What replaced it was quieter than anger and far more dangerous. I finally understood I was not dealing with a misunderstanding. I was dealing with people who had slowly built their happiness out of my loneliness. Over the next 3 days, my life settled into a strange routine that no longer felt entirely like my own. Every morning I woke before sunrise, brewed coffee in the old drip machine Charles bought 15 years ago, and sat at the kitchen table beside stacks of documents that seemed to grow larger by the hour. Outside, Vermont remained painfully beautiful beneath fresh snow. School buses moved slowly through quiet neighborhoods. Neighbors shoveled driveways in heavy boots and knit hats. Church bells rang softly downtown every afternoon. Ordinary life continued while mine quietly unraveled page by page. Martha came over every morning around 9 carrying her leather notebook and a container of something warm she insisted I eat. Chicken soup, blueberry muffins, tuna casserole. She never treated me like a helpless old woman, and somehow that made me feel stronger. We spread records across the dining room table and began tracing the missing money carefully. Some transfers were obvious. Luxury furniture stores in Massachusetts. Property taxes for the lake house Vanessa constantly posted online. Charges from spas, resorts, and designer boutiques. Others were hidden behind corporate names and investment accounts designed to look legitimate to someone who did not know what to search for. Martha knew exactly what to search for. People always think greed makes them clever, she muttered one afternoon while circling transactions with a red pen. Most greedy people are simply repetitive. By Thursday evening, we had uncovered nearly $280,000 transferred out of my accounts over 4 years. $280,000. I repeated the number silently several times because my mind still refused to accept it completely. That amount represented decades of sacrifice. Double shifts at the diner when Daniel needed braces. Cheap family vacations instead of expensive ones so we could pay down the mortgage early. The years Charles worked Saturdays repairing machinery because overtime meant security later in life. I suddenly remembered one winter about 20 years ago when our furnace broke during a blizzard. Charles spent 14 straight hours fixing it himself because we could not afford emergency repair fees. We sat wrapped in blankets, drinking instant coffee while snow blew through tiny cracks near the windows. I remember him smiling at me that night and saying, "One day we will finally relax, Ellie. One day life will get easier." I had believed him. Thursday night around 7:30 my phone rang again. Daniel. I stared at his name glowing across the screen while Martha quietly watched from the other side of the table. "Still not answering?" she asked gently. I shook my head. The voicemail notification appeared seconds later. Then another call followed almost immediately. This time Vanessa. Her message arrived first. "Eleanor, we are getting worried. Please call us back when you can." Worried. I almost laughed at the word. For nearly a year, they ignored half my calls completely. Last spring, I slipped on ice outside the grocery store parking lot and spent 6 hours in urgent care with a sprained wrist. Daniel texted me nearly 2 days later asking if I was doing better now. But suddenly, after the accounts froze, I mattered again. Their concern had arrived attached to money. Martha looked toward the phone thoughtfully. "They know something changed." I nodded slowly. "Good," I said quietly, surprising even myself with how calm my voice sounded. Later that night after Martha left, I sat alone in the living room with only the soft glow of the table lamp beside Charles's recliner. Snow tapped gently against the windows while the grandfather clock in the hallway counted each passing minute. I opened Facebook on my tablet almost without thinking. Vanessa had posted new photographs from a charity gala in Boston. She wore a black velvet dress with diamond earrings sparkling beneath ballroom lights, while Daniel stood beside her smiling confidently with one hand in his pocket. The caption read, "Blessed beyond words." I stared at that sentence for a very long time. Blessed. It amazed me how easily some people wrapped selfishness in beautiful language. As I scrolled through the photographs, I noticed something strange in the background of one image. A familiar leather briefcase sitting beside Daniel's chair. Brown leather. Silver buckle near the handle. My stomach tightened instantly. It belonged to Charles. My husband carried that briefcase to work almost every day for 25 years. After his funeral, I searched everywhere for it because inside was a small handwritten note he kept folded in the front pocket ever since we were newly married. I remembered crying when I could not find it. Vanessa told me she probably donated it accidentally during one of her organizing projects after the funeral. I zoomed in slowly on the photograph until the grainy image blurred beneath my fingertips. There was no mistake. They had taken more than my money. They had taken pieces of my husband while pretending to help me grieve. I lowered the tablet into my lap and stared at the darkened television screen across the room. The betrayal no longer felt financial. It felt personal in a way that hollowed something deep inside me. And for the first time since all of this began, I stopped wondering whether Daniel understood what he was doing. Because no man accidentally carries his dead father's briefcase to a party while his widowed mother searches for it alone. The following Monday morning, Martha drove me to an attorney's office in downtown Burlington while freezing rain coated the streets in a thin layer of gray slush. I wore my dark wool coat and the pearl earrings Charles gave me on our 30th anniversary. Something about putting them on that morning made me feel steadier, as though a small piece of him still sat beside me whispering not to back down now. The law office occupied the second floor of an old brick building overlooking Church Street. Inside, everything smelled faintly like coffee and paper. Diplomas hung neatly across the walls while soft instrumental music played somewhere near the reception desk. I remember thinking how strange it was that life-changing moments often happen in ordinary rooms with beige carpeting and bad lighting. Our attorney's name was Rebecca Lawson. Mid-50s. Calm voice. Sharp eyes that missed nothing. Martha had known her through church fundraising events years ago. Rebecca listened quietly while we explained everything from the forged signatures to the missing retirement funds and suspicious transfers. She never interrupted except to ask careful questions about dates and account access. By the time we finished, the legal pad in front of her was filled with notes written in small, precise handwriting. She folded her hands together and looked directly at me. "Mrs. Whitmore, I need to ask something difficult." I nodded slowly. "Do you want to protect your son from legal consequences?" The question settled heavily into the room. Outside the office window, freezing rain slid slowly down the glass, while traffic crawled through downtown Burlington below us. I stared at my hands for several seconds before answering honestly. "I do not know anymore." Rebecca gave a small, understanding nod. "That is fair." She explained our options carefully. Freeze remaining accounts immediately. Revoke all financial access. Transfer property authority. Amend the will and trust documents. Begin formal investigations, if necessary. The words sounded cold and official, but beneath each one lived a simple truth. My son and his wife had quietly built their future using pieces of mine. When the meeting ended nearly 2 hours later, I signed more paperwork than I had in years. My signature looked shaky at first, then steadier with each page. Power of attorney revoked. Beneficiaries changed. Digital account permissions removed completely. Rebecca recommended opening entirely new accounts at another bank outside Daniel's existing access network. People who manipulate finances rarely stop willingly once control disappears, she said calmly. Expect emotional pressure soon. Emotional pressure. The phrase followed me all afternoon like an approaching storm cloud. By the time I returned home, my phone already contained 6 missed calls from Daniel and 3 from Vanessa. There was also a text message waiting from my son. "Mom, please call me back. Something weird is happening with the accounts." I read the message twice before setting the phone down beside the kitchen sink. "Not Mom, are you okay?" "Not Mom, I miss you. Just the accounts." Snow began falling again around sunset, soft, thick flakes drifting beneath the porch light while I heated canned tomato soup on the stove. The house felt quieter than usual that evening, but not empty. Focused, like the silence itself was waiting beside me. Around 7:30, another call came through. This time, Daniel left a voicemail long enough that part of it transcribed automatically across my screen. "Mom, I do not know what is going on, but Vanessa says some payments bounced, and now the bank is saying there are restrictions. Please call me. We are getting really worried." We. I noticed how every sentence had become we. Shared panic. Shared confusion. Shared consequences. I leaned against the kitchen counter staring out toward the backyard while the voicemail replayed softly. "Charles used to say that real character reveals itself fastest when comfort disappears." At the time, I thought he meant strangers. I never imagined he meant our own child. The next morning, I drove alone to Burlington Savings Bank one final time to empty the remaining joint accounts entirely. The same young banker greeted me carefully, almost cautiously now. She helped me transfer everything into newly secured accounts Rebecca had arranged the day before. Retirement funds, savings, certificates of deposit. Every remaining dollar Charles and I had spent a lifetime protecting. As I signed the final document, the banker hesitated before speaking. "Your son called twice this morning asking for emergency access authorization." I looked up slowly. "Did you give it to him?" "No, ma'am," she answered immediately. "The accounts belong solely to you now." Solely to you now. Such simple words. Yet hearing them felt almost unreal after years of slowly surrendering pieces of myself without noticing. When I stepped outside the bank, the cold Vermont air hit my face sharply. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance while snow crunched beneath my boots. For the first time in years, I realized nobody else controlled what happened next. And somewhere nearly 3 hours away in Boston, my son and his wife were finally beginning to understand that the woman they treated like an endless safety net had quietly disappeared. The calls became relentless after that. By Wednesday morning, my voicemail inbox was completely full for the first time in years. Daniel called before breakfast. Vanessa called during lunch. Daniel again around dinner. Then text messages started arriving one after another with growing urgency, hidden beneath forced politeness. Mom, please talk to us. Mom, this is a misunderstanding. Mom, the bank says you changed everything. Without warning. Without warning. I stared at those words while sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in Charles's cardigan, with snow drifting lazily outside the windows. The irony almost made me smile. For 4 years they had changed pieces of my life without warning. My finances, my security, my memories, my trust. Yet the moment I protected myself, suddenly I was the unreasonable one. Martha stopped by Thursday afternoon carrying a loaf of banana bread still warm from the oven. She found me sitting quietly in the living room watching cardinals hop across the snow beneath the backyard feeder Charles built years ago. You look calmer, she observed gently as she removed her coat. I nodded slowly. I think shock wears off eventually. She studied me carefully for a moment. And what replaces it? I looked toward the window again before answering. Clarity. Martha smiled faintly like someone relieved to hear the correct answer. Around 4 o'clock that afternoon, a black SUV pulled into my driveway unexpectedly. My stomach tightened instantly even before Daniel stepped out from the driver's side wearing an expensive camel coat dusted with snowflakes. Vanessa climbed out seconds later, adjusting a cream-colored scarf around her neck while scanning the property with restless eyes. It struck me immediately how polished they both looked standing against the frozen Vermont landscape, like people visiting a place they had outgrown years ago. Daniel knocked twice before opening the front door himself using the old family key I forgot he still had. Mom, he called cautiously. I remained seated in the living room chair while Martha quietly moved into the kitchen without a word, giving me space while still staying close enough if needed. Daniel entered first, looking tired in a way I had not seen before. Not grief-tired, pressure-tired. Vanessa followed several steps behind him carrying the same designer handbag I remembered complimenting last Easter. You should have called before driving up here, I said calmly. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly. You were not answering. Vanessa attempted a nervous smile. We have been worried sick about you, Eleanor. There it was again. Concern arriving only after consequences. I folded my hands quietly in my lap. That is interesting, I replied softly. Because when I spent Christmas alone last year, neither of you seemed very worried at all. Silence settled heavily across the room. Daniel looked away first. Vanessa crossed her arms lightly. We are not here to argue, she said carefully. Then why are you here? I asked. My voice remained calm enough that even I barely recognized it. Daniel stepped forward quickly. Mom, the bank froze several business payments connected to our accounts. We just need to figure out what happened. Our accounts. Not your retirement. Not your savings. Our accounts. The wording landed like cold steel inside my chest. I looked directly at my son for several long seconds before speaking again. Daniel, whose money do you believe that was? His face flushed slightly. That is not fair. No, I answered quietly. None of this has been fair. Vanessa suddenly stepped in with that smooth, practiced voice she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable. Eleanor, we have helped you for years. Daniel handled things because online banking confused you sometimes. You know that. Confused you. Such a gentle little insult wrapped in fake concern. I remembered every moment she smiled patiently while explaining technology to me in front of other people. Every small joke about passwords and paperwork and aging. Little comments designed to slowly reposition me from capable woman to dependent burden. I rose slowly from the recliner, feeling the ache in my knees as I stood. I would like both of you to sit down, I said. Daniel immediately obeyed. Vanessa hesitated for the briefest second before sitting beside him on the couch. Snow tapped softly against the windows while the heater hummed low beneath the silence. For years I imagined this moment differently. I thought if I ever discovered betrayal from my own family, there would be screaming, tears, anger exploding across the room. Instead, I felt strangely calm watching them sit there together beneath the family photographs still hanging on my walls. My son, my daughter-in-law, two people who once claimed they loved me while quietly treating my life like an available resource. I walked slowly toward the dining room table where several neatly organized folders waited beside a yellow legal pad. Then I looked directly at Daniel and asked the question I should have asked years ago. Exactly when did you both decide I mattered more as a bank account than a mother? Daniel stared at me as though I had spoken in a language he no longer understood. For a moment, neither he nor Vanessa answered. The silence stretched across the room, while snow continued falling outside my windows in soft, steady waves. Somewhere in the kitchen, Martha quietly closed a cabinet door. Then everything became still again. Vanessa recovered first. She always did. Her posture straightened slightly, and that polished expression returned to her face like a curtain being pulled back into place. Eleanor, that is an incredibly hurtful accusation, she said carefully. We have only ever tried to help you. I looked at her for several long seconds before opening the first folder on the dining room table. That is interesting, I replied softly, because help usually does not require forged signatures. Daniel's eyes snapped toward Vanessa immediately. Just a flicker, barely noticeable. But after weeks of studying every document, every memory, every hesitation, I had become very good at noticing small things. Vanessa reached for the folder quickly. May I see that? No, I answered calmly, placing my hand over the papers. You have seen these documents for years already. Daniel stood abruptly from the couch and paced toward the front window. Mom, please, he said quietly. Can we just slow down and talk about this rationally? Rationally. I almost smiled hearing the word. Older women are always expected to remain rational, while people dismantle their lives politely around them. I pulled another paper from the folder and placed it carefully on the table between us. The hospital authorization form with my forged signature dated during my pneumonia hospitalization. Daniel stared at it silently, while the color slowly drained from his face. I did not sign this, I said. I was in Burlington Medical Center struggling to breathe while someone approved expanded access to my retirement account. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. Daniel handled paperwork while you were sick because you needed support. Support, I repeated softly. Is that what you call transferring nearly $300,000 into your business accounts? Daniel turned sharply toward his wife then. $300,000? He asked in disbelief. Vanessa's composure slipped for the first time. Only slightly, but enough. Daniel, do not act surprised now, she snapped quietly. Most of that money went toward investments for our future. Our future, not emergencies, not caregiving expenses. Their future. I watched realization begin moving slowly across my son's face, like sunlight uncovering damage after a storm. Vanessa, he whispered carefully, how much money did you move exactly? She looked away first. That told me everything. Daniel sank heavily back onto the couch while rubbing both hands over his face. Suddenly, he looked older than 39. Not wiser, just exhausted. I knew about some transfers, he admitted quietly without looking at me. But I thought they were temporary loans. Vanessa said you agreed to help us until the real estate project stabilized. The room fell completely silent. Temporary loans. I felt something inside me crack then, not from surprise, but from confirmation. My son had not protected me because protecting himself was easier. Vanessa turned toward him sharply. Do not put this entirely on me, she hissed. You benefited too. Daniel looked genuinely shaken now. You told me she approved everything. Because she always trusted you. Vanessa shot back instantly. And honestly, Daniel, she barely used half that money herself. There it was. The sentence beneath every action these past 4 years. She barely used it herself. To Vanessa, my sacrifices had become wasted potential sitting inside an old woman's bank account. Money meant for heating bills, medications, quiet retirement. Money she believed would serve a better purpose funding luxury properties and expensive dinners in Boston. I suddenly felt very tired. Not emotional tired. Soul tired. I sat down slowly at the head of the dining room table while looking at the family photographs hanging nearby. Christmas mornings. Lake trips. Birthday cakes. Decades of memories frozen inside wooden frames. I wondered how many moments had been genuine and how many had quietly revolved around maintaining access to my life. Daniel finally looked directly at me again, his eyes wet now with something that might have been shame. Mom, he whispered, I never wanted to hurt you. I held his gaze steadily. No, I answered quietly. You just found it convenient when someone else did. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Vanessa stood abruptly from the couch and grabbed her handbag. This is getting ridiculous, she snapped. We came here because we were worried, and now suddenly we are criminals. Martha appeared silently in the dining room doorway then, arms folded calmly across her sweater. "No," she said evenly. "You became criminals when you forged documents and stole retirement funds from a widow." Vanessa's face tightened instantly. For the first time since arriving, she looked genuinely afraid. Not afraid of me. Afraid of consequences. I closed the final folder carefully and stacked every document into one neat pile beside my elbow. Then I looked at my son one last time and spoke with a calmness I did not know I still possessed. "The hardest part is not losing the money, Daniel. It is realizing you only remembered I existed once the account stopped working." Daniel and Vanessa left less than 20 minutes later. There was no dramatic shouting at the end. No slammed doors. Just a silence so heavy it seemed to follow them all the way down the driveway, as snow continued falling beneath the porch light. Daniel paused once near his SUV and looked back toward the house like he wanted to say something else, but Vanessa touched his arm sharply and he climbed inside without another word. I stood at the front window watching their taillights disappear slowly into the white Vermont evening. Then the house became quiet again. Truly quiet this time. Martha remained for another hour helping me gather the papers from the dining room table. Neither of us spoke much. Some wounds are too deep for constant conversation. Before leaving, she hugged me tightly near the front door. "You did the right thing," she whispered. I nodded, though the truth felt more complicated than that. Doing the right thing does not always feel powerful. Sometimes it simply feels lonely. After she left, I made myself a cup of tea and walked slowly through the house, turning off lamps one by one. In the hallway, I paused beside the framed photograph from Daniel's 10th birthday party. Charles stood behind him with both hands resting proudly on his shoulders, while chocolate cake frosting covered Daniel's cheeks. I touched the corner of the frame gently. There were still moments when I could see my little boy beneath the man he became. That was the hardest part of all. Betrayal from strangers hurts your pride. Betrayal from your child rearranges your memories. The next several weeks passed quietly. Rebecca Lawson handled the legal paperwork carefully and efficiently. Formal notices were sent. Accounts remained protected. The investigation into the forged documents continued privately through the bank's fraud department. Daniel called several more times during the first week, but the messages slowly changed. At first there was panic, then apologies, then long emotional explanations about pressure and investments and misunderstandings. I listened to every voicemail exactly once before deleting them. Vanessa never called again. That did not surprise me. People like Vanessa only remain close while access remains useful. What surprised me was how calm my life slowly became once the constant manipulation disappeared. By February, the snowbanks around the house stood nearly 4 feet high. I spent mornings reading beside the living room window with a blanket across my lap, and afternoons volunteering twice a week at the church food pantry with Martha. For the first time in years, I stopped checking my phone hoping someone might remember me. One afternoon, while organizing canned goods in the pantry basement, Martha glanced over and smiled softly. "You look lighter lately." I thought about that for a moment before answering. I think I finally stopped waiting for people to become who they were never going to be. She nodded like someone who understood completely. In early March, I made one final decision that surprised almost everyone except myself. I sold the house. Not because I had to, because I wanted to. The little white home Charles and I built our life inside deserved better than becoming a battlefield filled with bad memories. A retired schoolteacher from Montpelier bought it with tears in her eyes after seeing the garden and the bird feeders in the backyard. I left her the kitchen curtains and Charles's handmade workbench in the garage. Somehow that felt right. I moved into a quiet lakeside senior community outside Burlington where the apartments overlooked frozen water and tall pine trees dusted with snow. My new place was smaller, warmer, easier to manage. Every morning, I walked beside the lake with coffee in my hand while geese drifted silently across the pale gray water. Nobody there knew anything about missing money or forged signatures or broken trust. They only knew me as Eleanor, the woman who fed birds on the dock every morning at 7:30. Daniel came to see me once in April. Alone this time. He looked thinner than before, older somehow. We sat together in the community garden while cold spring wind rustled through the bare trees. He apologized quietly for nearly an hour. Some of it sounded sincere. Some of it sounded rehearsed. Mostly he sounded like a man finally realizing comfort and character are not the same thing. When he finished speaking, I looked at him for a very long time before answering honestly. "I still love you, Daniel," I said softly. But love stops being safe when trust disappears. Tears filled his eyes then, but I did not cry with him. Some grief arrives too late to be shared equally. After he left, I sat alone on the bench watching sunlight shimmer across the lake, while the cold breeze carried the smell of pine and thawing earth. For years I believed growing old meant slowly becoming invisible. What I finally understood was something very different. The people who truly love you never make you earn your place in their lives. And the silence that followed after I closed those accounts told me more about my family than words ever could.